Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of our reading group. Welcome, and thank you again to Emperors for hosting this event and for Dr. Wilcox for donating her time and energy into the translations that we're going to look at today. If you have questions during the presentation, just wait for Dr. Wilcox to ask for questions, please. Or you can drop your question into the chat box and I'll ask it on your behalf. If you don't want to ask it out loud, that's fine. At the end, we're going to have a little presentation from Ingrid of the TCM Learning Garden. So stay tuned for that too, please. All right.
My turn? Okay, here we go then. Let's see, share screen. Okay. And almost ready. Okay, here we go. So something that's always fascinated me about our medicine is this concept of intent and how the practitioner's mind can influence the efficacy of the treatment. I think it's something that most acupuncturists have heard of, but as you know, I like to research into what's said in the older books. So this is kind of me compiling a bunch of different things that relate to this. First, I think we should talk about this character E, but not for too long because it gets boring to talk about characters endlessly, at least for some people. There's an ancient Chinese Han Dynasty etymological dictionary called Shuowenjiezi, which is, often the first go-to place to figure out what a character originally meant, although the author of it wasn't always exactly right on, wasn't always exactly correct, but he said that this character E means Jur, the will, which, E, of course, is the spirit that's stored in the spleen, and Jur is the spirit that's stored in the kidneys. But both of those words are used in everyday Chinese for lots of other things. So while they can mean those two of the five spirits, they also have a vast range of meaning. But I found that pretty interesting. And then I thought I might as well look up what does Jur mean if E means Jur, will. And so according to Kroll's dictionary, which is a really nice one, he says intention, resolve, will, which is what we often translated in Chinese medicine, but still intention. Then looking at what does Lingshu say, Lingshu chapter 8 says that whatever the heart keeps in mind, which is this character, is called intent. And if you look at the two characters, you can see the right side of the first character is the same as the whole character of the second one. And this is like E means E. It's pronounced the same too. It's just we're adding the heart radical to it. So that's kind of interesting. This character E that has the heart radical is, among other things, to recollect, to remember, to keep in mind. So, this is, I'm just trying to get a grasp of the full meaning of this word E. It has two parts. The bottom part is the heart radical. So it has something to do with consciousness or mind or emotion or something. And the top part, I don't know if it's relevant. I mean, people do try to make connections, but sound or musical note or voice, I don't really know how that fits in. Kroll, as far as E goes, we saw what Kroll said for Jur. He says, first meaning thought, idea, mentation. Okay, that can make some sense. The second one, though, is the one that is how we translate it most in the context of doing acupuncture and what we do with our mind while we're inserting and manipulating the needle. Intention or purpose, expression of intent. It's not just the intent, but how we express it from our heart to our hands, as we're going to see. And it has some other meanings, and yeah, it does say that it can mean the same as that other character E, which means to remember. And as I said, it's also the name of the spirit that's stored in the spleen. So one thing I do want to say is that this word E is going to be translated differently in different contexts. Like you have to, there's not one word, we can't use the word intent every time we see this word E. We have to look at the context to decide which of these many meanings it might have. Here's some other more modern dictionaries which you can look at, but I don't want to spend too much time with it. However, I do want to point out this one thing at the bottom, that in certain compound terms, this word E can mean creativity or ingenuity, which maybe at the end of today's, little discussion, I'm going to be talking about that a little bit. So even before we have Huangdi Neijing, in other books, philosophical books that are not, acupuncture, Chinese medicine books, but philosophical books, there were discussions or stories that have to do with this, even if they didn't use the word E. But some of you have probably heard these stories. This is really ancient. This is like, 2,300 years ago, and my Chinese is not good enough. So I'm using Patricia Ebry's translation and not my own translation. And there's this story of a chef or a cook whose name was Ding, and he was butchering a cow. So I'm sorry if you're vegetarian, but this is the story. And he's working for a duke, and the duke comes into the kitchen or wherever he's, butchering the cow. And the story goes that he's kind of dancing while, he's kind of singing or listening to music and kind of dancing as he's working with his knives. And it's just like a beautiful ballet or something like that. His movements are so incredible. So the Duke says, how amazing that your skill is so wonderful. And the cook puts down his knife and says, hey, it's not my skill, it's the Tao, it's the way. This is something even better than skill. Sure, I have skill, but actually what I have is the Tao. And then he starts telling this story that when he first started butchering animals, he saw like the whole animal. He just saw the way you and I see things probably most of the time. But after 3 years, he no longer saw it as a whole thing. Basically, what he sees now is that he deals with it through his spirit rather than with his eyes. And so he's encountering it in kind of a different level of consciousness now, using his spirit, not his physical eyes. And so he relies on the natural pattern within the flesh. I'm sure if you've ever had a turkey at Thanksgiving, and how you've got the wing and you've got to hold it a certain way, and then you get the knife to go through where the joint is and not trying to cut through the bone and so forth. So he's looking at the natural pattern of the flesh, striking at the big openings leading into the main cavities. He follows its inherent nature. And so he never actually is cutting things, even the soft tissue like ligament or tendon. He's never, of course, even trying to chop through a bone. And so a good cook has to change his knife once a year because he just hacks at it. And an ordinary cook changes his knife every month because he's just such a butcher. But this Chef Ding, his knife is 19 years old and it's carved through several thousand cows, yet it looks brand new, like it just came from the factory. So here's the part, I mean, the first thing, is, yeah, he's perceiving it through his spirit and not through his physical eyes. But here's what he says that I think is so relevant to inserting the needle. There's spaces in the joints and the blade has no thickness. So when something with no thickness enters something with space, there's plenty of room, there's no resistance. And so, the points are actually, the word doesn't mean point. The Chinese word doesn't mean point, it means a hole, an opening. So there's spaces in the points, in the holes, in the openings, and the needle has no thickness. So how could there be resistance when you insert the needle? And so after 19 years, his knife still seems, fresh. However, if it's like a difficult thing he has to do, he inspects it closely, he keeps his eyes on what he's doing, he proceeds deliberately, he starts out slowly, and then suddenly, and the cow comes apart just like a lump of earth that crumbles into pieces. And I clean my knife and put it away. So I've told this story in some classes, and I've had students come to me later and say, because I've said, like, when you're inserting a needle, and especially like, techniques class, or when you're new in clinic, it's like I always would get like nervous, and then I try to put it in and the needle just wants to bend and it doesn't want to go in, and the patient's saying, ow, and so forth. But stop and take a breath and just remember that the point is an opening, even if you can't see it with your physical eyes. And the needle is so fine and thin that there's plenty of room for it. So you stop, you forget all the resistance that you see with your eyes, and with your spirit, what resistance could there be when you've got such a fine needle and you've got a hole or an opening. That's the point. And students have come back to me and told me that can really help them in clinic. And after a while, you don't have to think about it, because that's how you encounter in needling. So that's a really famous story, and I think it has great application for inserting the needle. So yeah, the Lord says, hey, great, I learned something today. So that's the first little story I wanted to give you. Questions, comments, experience? Okay. Oops. Okay, there's another story from Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi is amazing. Parts of it are just hard to understand, but like the good parts are so fabulous. So this is from a different chapter of Zhuangzi, from the same book, from the same philosopher. And so Duquan was reading a book in his hall, and in his office, whatever. And wheelwright Yen, so somebody who's making wheels for him, had been chiseling a wheel in the courtyard nearby. And he set down his tools and he went to ask the Duke, what are you reading? And probably this wheelwright is illiterate. Okay. And the status is, level is so different between the two of them. And so the Duke says, oh, I'm reading the words of the sages, like he's a big, important guy, And so the wheelwright asks, are the sages still living? And the Duke says, nope, these are old dead guys. And the wheelwright says, that means you're just reading the dregs, the leftover of long gone men, doesn't it? And the Duke is really offended. You're just a lowly wheelwright. You're not even literate. How can you say that? That's so rude. Death penalty, unless you can give me a good reason why you said such a thing. He's all arrogant and stuff like that. So wheelwright Bien said, in my case, I see things the way, I observe my own life, and that's how I see things. When I'm making a wheel, when I'm chiseling at it, if I move too slow, the chisel slides and doesn't go where it's supposed to go. But if I hurry, it jams and doesn't move properly. Then here's the part. When it's neither too slow nor too fast, there's something I feel between my hand and my heart. There's something from my heart that responds into the hand, and it's not something I can explain, but it's something that I experience between my hands and my heart. And I haven't been able to teach this to my son because it's not something you can express in words. And my mouth cannot describe it in words. It's between my hand and my heart. So I can't tell my son how to do this, and he's never been able to figure it out. And so I've gone on for 70 years growing old, chiseling wheels. I want to retire, but my son just can't take over my business. And so the men of old died in possession of what they couldn't transmit. There was something in, the sages that wrote your book that was in their heart, but it couldn't be expressed in words. So what you're reading is just kind of the leftovers, or like a poor representation of it. And again, I think, this thing about like when you're manipulating the needle, there's something that's communicated from the heart to the hand, and it's something your techniques teacher can't teach you. It's something you have to find in yourself. And maybe you haven't found it yet. Some of you may have indeed found it, but if you keep looking for it, you probably can find it. I would say, when I was practicing, I don't find it every time I insert the needle, and I certainly didn't find it in the beginning because I'm like good at book stuff, like the Duke, or whatever is that, a Duke? Yeah, the Duke. I'm not so good at heart to hand stuff, but nevertheless, with some practice, and eventually I could find how to connect my heart to my hands. So I would say, don't despair if you haven't found it yet. It's something that nobody can teach you, but you can discover it within yourself. And again, I think this story is very relevant to the practice of acupuncture. So again, any questions or comments? Okay.
I do.
Question.
Oh, yes. Hi.
Hi. So just going back to Butcher Ding, I was thinking about this as it relates to like using thick or thin needles, and like feeling like sometimes when I'm inserting a needle and I want to use a very thin needle, just maybe to not injure the patient, to cause as little as pain as possible, but maybe there's like tension or whatever that's preventing the needle from going in. But if I'm just more patient, and I just try to calmly insert the needle, that then it will go in easily. But
if
then,
you're sorry.
No, go ahead.
If you're thinking about the resistance and it's not going in, it's not going to go in. So you have to think about the emptiness of the hole, of the point. You have to think it's not a point, it's a hole, it's an opening. That Chinese word really does, that word shui, which is usually translated as point, is a hole or an opening. So yeah, let go of the resistance and think of the hole. So there's space.
Okay. And then the other part of my question is, some people say that you have to use thick needles to get any response, to get an effect. And I'm just wondering what you think of that, and how you can relate that to the Butcher Ding story.
I think that you need to be able to use your mind to make happen what you want to happen. And some of the future slides are going to talk about that. And if you in your mind feel that thick needles are required, then they are required for you. But if in your mind you really have an understanding that you're using your your intent to make it happen, and you're not using the physical, size of the needle, then, there's a quote at the end of this slideshow. I don't know if I'll say it properly, but like, magic is just, science that hasn't been explained yet, or something like that. And I do really believe that the mind is so powerful, and that there is magic in acupuncture if you harness your mind to do that. So yeah, if you believe you need a thick needle, then you do. If you believe you need that a thin needle is okay, you can do it. And if you say, gee, I don't know, I'm uncertain, you're not going to have your focused intent. So you have to act as if what you're doing in that moment is going to do it. And that's going to increase the efficacy of the acupuncture, regardless of the needle size. That's my opinion. I'm not saying I'm the queen of the universe.
Thank you.
I think someone else had their hand up.
I did. I've been practicing. Hi. I've been practicing for about 10 years now, and I can still remember when the needles went in, and they just kind of felt like butter. It just went in so, and I was still learning, but I was still focusing on my intent consciously, and it just makes such a big difference when you get out of the, very soon below the clavicle on the blah blah on the, I know that the point location is important, but once you just kind of let that go a little bit. I mean, your point location is definitely important, but your intent is so much more important, because the whole is bigger than you might think. This is amazing. Thank you, Lorraine, so much.
Thank you, Ingrid. And yeah. I would like to point out, like, I assume you guys all drive cars, do you remember when you first drove and the car felt so big and you had to cling to the wheel, and you had to remember, okay, now I put it in drive, and now I have to put my foot on the, and you had to be like focusing on the technique because you're so new. But like, I'm sure by now you just drive and you don't even have to think about the technical aspects of driving. And it's the same with needling. In the beginning, you have to think about which hand do I do this, and where do I hold, and am I going clockwise, counterclockwise, and all these kinds of things. You have to think so much about that when you're new. And at some point you can just do it. And when you can just do it, you can focus your intent rather than having it be on the like technical aspect of needling. I think that's like that. We do want this to be a discussion. It says in chat from Eric. So, please feel free to, talk. Yes, I agree.
Okay, good. I remember when I learned to drive a stick when I was 16 from my stepdad, and I was so worried because of all of the things that you have to do. And then he said, probably one of the best things that he's ever said to me was something to the effect of, just chill out, because eventually driving is going to feel like the car is a part of you. Yeah. So if needling is a part of you,
yeah.
It was just back to the car reference, the driving reference.
Yeah. I learned to drive a stick too. My father made me learn that before I learned to drive an automatic. And then the boys said, oh, girls aren't supposed to drive a stick shift. It's like, never mind. Yeah, okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going on to the next phase. So let's move on to medical sources. So in Lingshu and Suwen, sometimes they use the word E in terms of intent while needling, and sometimes they didn't. But some of the descriptions of needling in Lingshu especially are really pretty amazing. And so Lingshu chapter 9 says, when you're giving a treatment, go to a quiet, secluded place. Divine the coming and going of the spirit. Close the doors and fill in the windows. Don't let the hun and the po scatter. Focus your intent and unify your spirit with undivided jingqi. Do not listen to human sounds. In order to gain the jing, the essence, you must unify your spirit and command your will to be present in the needle. So I'll admit I don't understand the instructions for everything in this sentence, but it's actually really interesting because he, mentions the hun and the po and the e and the shen, and the jur is somewhere over here. Where did the jur go? Here's the jur, and he mentions jing and he mentions qi. It's like, wow, you're just focusing all of that. I think this is like some sentences you could just meditate on for a while or something like that. Let's look at a few more. So Lingshu chapter 1 says the Tao of the needle. So, needle technique, if you want it to be more than just skill, but you want to achieve the Tao, like Chef Ding said. Hold it firmly as if it were a treasure. Hold your needle as if it were a treasure. You don't want to drop it. You don't want it to fall. You don't want it to break. You're going to treasure it. Insert it perpendicular is what people think that this means. Well, okay, we don't always do that. Don't deviate to the left or right. Your spirit should be focused on an autumn hair and directing your intent to the patient. Okay, so the autumn hair has the image of the needle, right? Like a hair from an animal. The animals, they grow like fine underhair in the autumn to make their coat thicker for the winter. So those fine hairs, that's like the needle. And the point is like as tiny as a fine hair, and direct your intent to the patient. So again, I don't have the wisdom for just fully lecturing and explaining all of this kind of stuff, but I think this is stuff we should meditate on when we're pondering how to have not just skill, but Tao of needling. Lingshu chapter 1 also says when qi arrives, when you get qi, when you have qi sensation, and when qi arrives at the place you want it to go, it will have effect. You can count on it. It's like wind blowing away the clouds. So if you've got a blockage there, when the qi arrives after you've been needling, it's going to be just like blowing away any obstruction. It's bright, like seeing the blue sky. This is the complete Tao of needling. I think these are such amazing quotes, although I can't explain them, but yeah. So, you could visualize as you're needling, visualize like wind blowing away the obstruction in the region, if there's pain or something like that, because, pain is blockage, right? Suwen chapter 25, when the channel qi has arrived after you've been needling, carefully guard it. Do not lose it. Okay. So you can see that while, that Suwen and Lingshu did, think that the mind of the practitioner was important during the process of needling. These are instructions for, not just hand technique, but mind technique as well. Handle the needle as if approaching a deep abyss. And there's another chapter, Suwen chapter 54, which has repeats what's in Suwen 25 and adds some commentary on it, not daring to stumble. If you're at the edge of a cliff, you have to focus your consciousness so you don't make a misstep, so you don't fall off the cliff. And your hand should be like it's holding a tiger. That other chapter adds desiring the strength to hold a tiger. I don't know. Your spirit should be focused. Your spirit should not be thinking about all the other stuff. How much am I going to charge the patient? And how often should they come back? And what am I going to have for lunch afterwards? And stuff like that. Your mind should not be thinking about all those other things. Your mind, should be so focused as if you were holding a tiger, because, I think there's a Chinese saying that, if you're going to ride a tiger, it's hard to dismount because as soon as you dismount, the tiger can turn around and get you, right? You need incredible focus for these things. So those are a few quotes from Ling Shu and Su Wen. Anything you want to say? Humans. Okay. Then, there's this biography. Okay, who? Hello.
Yeah,
Is that
hi,
Doug?
Doug.
Doug.
I was intrigued by the human sounds from about 4 slides,
Yeah.
which I kind of thought of as almost like neurosis or tripping out, we would say, modern. Do not listen to human sounds like I don't know. It just sound like don't be neurotic.
I think it's the way I've interpreted it, but what do I know? But what I think is it means don't be chatting with your patient, don't be listening to the radio, don't be listening to conversations in the next room, have your, don't be distracted by humans and their chatter. But I could be totally wrong.
Okay. All right.
I could be wrong.
I'll meditate on that.
This word could mean voice. Is someone else talking?
Oh, it's Denise.
Hi, Denise.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I sort of looked at it the same way that you did, but, because I don't know that it might feel too modern to think about, the voices we hear in our heads, as you were talking about how when we're learning, we're so focused, on the chatter of all the things that we're supposed to be doing, and should I have a thick needle? Should I have a thin needle here? And do I have the right point location? And am I going to hurt the patient? That kind of internal dialogue. I think it definitely is talking about, not having that. But I did feel like the human sounds was more like, everything in the kind of environment.
Not just external, but also internal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. You're right. I'm sure you're right. So
Can I chime in there?
of course.
Some of the people that I've been working on either through body work and graduated to acupuncture, and both for almost 20 years. Everybody wants to catch up, and you want to talk, and you want to do all of the things, and say all of the things while you're having your treatment, when the intention should be completely something else. So I have absolutely stopped responding to their questions once they're on my table and I'm getting ready to give them acupuncture. I mean, we talk beforehand, but the conversation while needling, I do still ask them to state, what's your intention? What do you want out of this treatment? I ask them to say that out loud, so I'm not the only one kind of trying to make it different. So, but yeah, great. Hi, Doug. That's all.
Thank you for sharing it. You know, I do appreciate that we have some longtime practitioners as well as some people who are still students. So it's a nice mix. Anyone else?
Yes, can you go back a couple slides?
What are we
this,
looking?
this one.
Okay.
So this is what Dr. Eisenstark said is like how I read this particular quote, that like, don't let the needle deviate to the right or the left. I was reading this as like a metaphor for like the mind, like keep your mind focused while you're needling. And
Yeah.
not like necessarily just about the needle itself, but more metaphor.
It does have, well, I can't get my cursor to be in the right place. Why can't I? There, okay. It does say, you know, without the needle left, right. So needle is specifically there, but I do think that these quotes are also talking about your mind shouldn't be deviating to the left or right. You know, I think it's all part of the package. And yeah, sometimes it's hard to tell the patient to be quiet. You know, now we're going to have a quiet time while I insert the needles. And it's hard for me to quiet my mind. But this is, I guess, you know, you could kind of maybe, at least with some of your patients, get into a meditative state while you're needling almost, you know, get into, I don't know. I really did find when I was practicing that sometimes I could get into like a different state of mind, almost like a different level of consciousness than my everyday me, Lorraine, who's all clumsy and awkward and doesn't know how to interact with people. But it's like putting on my, you know, white jacket was almost like Superman putting on his cape. And now I had some different powers that I could at least sometimes access. And, you know, if you need that kind of imagery, then putting on your lab coat is, you know, like, you know, you're not Clark Kent anymore. Now you're Superman and you have certain powers and you're in a different state of being. Maybe that can at least help in the beginning. But I agree. It's like this, while it says the needle in this particular one, but overall, we have to somehow learn to get to a different state while we're needling the patient and not be chit-chatting and thinking about unimportant stuff if we want to be an amazing practitioner, if we want to have the Tao and not just skill.
I had an experience with an acupuncturist where I would go to her office and each time I would fall into what felt like a very meditative or trance-like state pretty early. And I asked her about it one time and she would be chatting and then she'd start to slow down. And she said, well, I bring you to the same room. I say certain things. And even before the needles get in, we're setting this sort of intention, you know, you're tapping into this. And it felt very beautiful and helpful for me to remember that then in the future, where I can, as a patient, start to slow myself down to prepare for the medicine. So.
And also as a practitioner, you can start to figure out how to do that in your own way with your patients. Okay. So anything else, or should I move on to this person named Boyu? Again, this is hard to translate, so I borrowed a translation. This is from a history book, actually, a history of the later Han Dynasty. And it's translated by these people. At the end of this little section, I think I have the, you know, citation for where I got this. And so Guo Yu was a doctor who worked sometimes with the king of whatever place he was. And so this is from his biography. He was considerate of other people. He wasn't snobbish or arrogant, even though he was an official. The stuff in parentheses is commentary that these translators put in. Even though people were poor or the children of servants, he always did his best to treat them. But whenever he treated the rich, sometimes it wasn't effective. So the emperor asked a rich person to change into a poor person's clothes and go to Goyu for treatment. And the person had one acupuncture treatment and recovered after he probably hadn't been able to have effect from other practitioners or even from Goyu. And so like when Goyu treats rich and noble people, he gets nervous and doesn't have good effect. But when he treats the same guy but in like poor person's clothing, he's very effective. So the emperor said, hey, what's up with that? And Goyu said, the practice of medicine involves E, which is, our topic today. And these translators say that means concentration here, but like you and I tend to use the word intent more. And the translators also pointing out, I don't know what might there, okay, that this is kind of a pun because this has the word E is medicine, and then this word E is intent, or he's translating it as concentration. So this is a common thing in Chinese, is to define one word with another word that sounds almost the same. It's just a literary device. And so Goyu says the practice of medicine involves E, intent, or whatever. The interstices, the soli, the pores, whatever, are very minute or fine. If you treat carelessly with acupuncture, you can miss the place. The spirit must be located between the heart and the hand. This can be understood, but it is very hard to explain. So that's exactly what Wheelwright Bien said to, when he's making wheels, there's something that responds between his heart and his hand that he can't explain to his son, and his son can't learn it. So he's still 70 years later, still making wheels. This is he's basically quoting from Zhuangzi, but I think this is a really important concept to find that connection between the heart and the hands and leave the head out of it at the time that you're needling. And so he goes on to explain rich people have high status, and doctors at that time were pretty low status. So I'm nervous when I treat them, when I serve them. When coming for treatment, rich people also have some other problems because they do as they please and they don't listen to my advice. Sound familiar, doesn't it? That's the first problem. The second is they don't take care of themselves. Yeah, our patients are the same. Third is their bones and joints are not strong, so I can't use the strongest medicine. And the fourth is they like to be idle and they don't like to work. So he says not only does he feel like imposter syndrome in front of the rich and noble patients, but also they do things to sabotage their own treatment. But he says acupuncture has rules and sometimes they're mistakes. So when treating a rich person, he's fearful and nervous, and his will, his zhi, takes great care, and his E, and here instead of, they called it concentration before, but here they're translating it as thinking, his E cannot be free. So how can I focus on the disease? And that's why I have a hard time treating rich people. And the emperor said, that's pretty cool. Okay, that's a good explanation. Here's the article that it came from. I was able to find this online and download it. So if you want to read, the biography of this doctor, there are other interesting stories in it, but this is the one that's relevant. And so you can find this, the whole article online if you want it. And so before I ask, any questions or comments, this sentence in the story is the practice of medicine is described as intention, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. But later it got shortened to 4 words. Medicine is intention. And so, and that's again, yay. So these two words are pronounced almost the same. So it's like a pun or a literary device. So an example of this is Sun Simiao, a famous Tang Dynasty doctor, says medicine is intention. Somebody who's good at using intention will be a good doctor. Okay, this story is very specifically about needling. He's talking about, the point location, the points are really tiny and you can miss the point. And he's talking very specifically about needling. Later, we'll see some who talk about, medicine in general that use this sentence, but right now he is talking about needling. So any questions, comments?
I was like, yes, I love that phrase that medicine is intention, because even water is just water, but it can be used therapeutically, and that's with like anything, massage, food, literal medicine. So I don't know, I think this is very profound. I like that.
It's really important for us. By the way, in the discussion, in Populi, there's that discussion board, and I did put a couple articles, an abstract to one article and a whole article that have to do with like biomedical studies on the intent of the practitioner, not talking Chinese medicine, but talking about MD type stuff, and how your facial expression and your belief in what you're doing actually makes a difference for the patients. It's really interesting that Western medicine is starting to realize it's not just placebo of the patient, but if the practitioner believes, in their treatment, they're not going to use the word intent, but that it can make a difference in the outcome. So this, anyone else?
Well, just about feeling like you're being authentic when you're practicing, I sort of feel like it took me years and years, probably at least like 6 years before I felt like I wasn't going to hurt somebody or do it wrong or something like that. So it takes a while. That was my experience.
Yeah, I agree. We all start, or most of us start with imposter syndrome and or just lack of confidence.
Yeah, and then like 10 years later, I'm like, okay, go back to the 6 levels. What's your real diagnosis? So I know it's pretty basic, but it's going to help you a lot. Okay, bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. I really love this story. I only found this story a couple months ago. It's not a medical story. It's actually from a book that's like, there's a genre in Chinese culture that in English is often called Tales of the Strange. And it's like Chinese ghost stories, but not just ghost stories. It's also stories of unexplained phenomena and so forth. And so, every so often I, translate some of these, and I really like this one and think it applies actually to needling. So, here's the information where this came from. And so this is the story. So there's a record of a dice incantation from some book. Okay, so incantations are like mantras. Some of incantations are Buddhist incantations and very mantra-like, and some are Taoist incantations, and some are just, weird and not of any particular religion. But mantra and incantation have been pretty important in a lot of things. Sorry, I'm just seeing how many slides I have. 38 slides. Okay, yeah, we're doing good. Okay, so in some book, there's a dice incantation. In other words, when you're gambling and you're playing a dice game and you want the dice to go the way you want so you win, there's an incantation to give you the power to do that, is what he's saying. And so, the incantation is something like Idi, Midi, Mije, Wodi. And then you'd repeat that 100,000 times. And if you repeat it 100,000 times, then all the dice are going to do what you tell them to do. That's what the book says. Okay, so there's, some information down here you can read on your own. So he and some of his friends and colleagues tried it. And he said some of the people who try it confirm that it works, and others say, no, it didn't work for me at all. And so the author of this says and here's a very interesting statement. He says, this is like reciting the word donkey to treat disease. And what apparently he means, because I found this first in an English translation, and the footnote in the English, this is my own translation, but I could check what the other English translation said. And what they said this means is that, you could just, instead of actually using jiao, you could just kind of say donkey with confidence to treat a patient. Well, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if I have that kind of power yet, or dangui, just chant dangui repeatedly like it's a mantra, and your gynecology patients will get better. I don't know. It's like a weird statement. But he goes on to say, generally speaking, when something is gathered by Jingshen, and here what he means is your whole consciousness and being, okay, the qi mechanism, the qi ji, responds to it. Once the qi mechanism resonates, ghosts and spirits will make it happen. Now, we can interpret ghosts and spirits literally and then say, oh, that's just superstition, and maybe this just is superstition. But I think what he means is there's some kind of unexplained supernatural ability that is hard to explain. It that we don't have to take it as literal ghosts and spirits. So this is the meaning of the saying. Apparently there's a saying in Chinese, completely seeing something as already real can even crack open metal and stones. So up to this point, the Chinese is not the way we'd say it in modern times. So he's basically saying that if you focus your consciousness, there's some kind of qi mechanism that's going to respond to your consciousness. And once the qi mechanism responds, it's going to somehow become reality. And so he says, earnestly believing it, one sees it as already real. When it's seen as already real, it will be set in motion. If you just try it tentatively, it's like, well, I don't know if this will work, but I'm going to give it a try. I kind of doubt it, but let's see. If you do it tentatively like that, then you're not seeing it as real. And when you don't see it as real, this mechanism is not set into motion. And he's saying this doesn't just apply for the dice incantation. He says, if you're trying to refine any skill, it's the same thing, including acupuncture. It's not just this incantation. So what I understand him to say is that, when you're inserting the needle and manipulating the needle and treating the patient, like, let's say if they have shoulder pain, okay? You just have to see, as it said before, like a wind blowing the clouds away. You have to see that in your mind and know that it's happening. And it has to be real in your mind. But if you just think, oh, I hope this is going to help your shoulder pain, kind of non-specific and kind of hopeful without a lot of confidence, it's not going to, it's not going to be set into motion. It's not going to happen. And one of the things I strongly believe about intent is it's not just a general, oh, I hope this helps my patient. Of course, we should hope it helps the patient. Or it's not just, oh, I hope this patient's pain goes away, but it's actually seeing the blockage dissolve. your intent is like, has to be really specific, and see it as happening while you're manipulating the needle. And then your treatment is going to be so much more powerful. I really believe that. So is that the last? Oh, yeah, that's the last of that slide. So any questions and comments? Yeah, you could use other mantras. Yeah.
I want to comment on this, that without even knowing, it's so beautifully articulated, but I've been practicing this all the time. I have a mantra that usually I start my day with meditating on this mantra, and do whenever any type of meditation I do it with this mantra. And I remember like first quarter, of course, when I'm entering the room, I'm so scared, and in my head I have this conversation. Oh, I hope I don't kill this person. I don't put the needle in the wrong place, or my techniques are correct. But nevertheless, regardless of all this, I remember first time my hand was shaking, and I'm greatly, grateful to the supervisor that I asked to come to help me, show me the points to do it correctly. But nevertheless, the second time I entered the room, and this is like day 2 after, like in my day 2 clinic, the second week. And I entered the clinic, and I just remembered what I usually do in yoga. And it's just very simple practice. I just wanted to show it to you. It may not make any sense to you whatsoever, but I wanted to show it to you. Maybe it's useful for some of you. So I stand up in the room, and even physically or even in my mind, I just draw up, and I gather the energy of heaven. And very slowly I bring it to every chakra, especially to my throat and chest and to my dantian, and then bring this energy to my foot. So if I don't have the time, I just simply tap here to the crown of the head and just tap hardly on my foot. And then when I do that, I have no intention of any technique whatsoever. What I think is Nilu is not present in the room. What is present is the energy of heaven and earth that goes to my hand. And I often feel my hand is very hot. My fingertips is very hot. And I just put the needle in. And miraculously, I have no idea how it's working, but it's working. And patients respond okay to it, and they come back and get their appointment again. But I totally believe in this, and it's beautiful because when you set your intention, like Nilu is not there, it's heaven and earth, that I'm the channel only that brings that energy to the patient.
Thank you. That's lovely. I would like to clarify something though. I think mantra is fabulous, but I don't think that's the point of this story. I think the point of this is like, if somebody chants a mantra 100,000 times in order to be able to make something happen, and if they believe it, it's going to happen. But it doesn't even need to be a mantra that, it doesn't even need to be a mantra. It needs to be something that inspires belief. So if I just walk in the room and think, me, Lorraine, I can do this, I probably don't feel like I have the power. But mantra may not be the way I'm able to feel the confidence and power. It might be something else. It might be mantra. It might be, some other type of belief, or some other type of meditation, or some other type of focus. And so I think what the point is, whatever it takes, you need to believe it and see that healing as already happening. And not like, gee, I wonder if I'm going to help this patient. You can't be tentative. You have to. And I think sometimes it's like, how an actor can take a role, and while they're doing that role, they're just inhabiting that role, and they're not their own everyday self, right? So I think when we put on our doctor's coat, we have to inhabit that role when we're in front of the patient with confidence, but not overconfidence, right? But with confidence, and just even if you have doubts as soon as you leave the treatment room, when you're in that room, you have to inhabit that role and believe that what you're doing is already taking effect. That's what I think this is saying.
I really appreciate the distinction that you're making between like intention and hope, like wishful thinking for your patient.
Yeah.
And like what you just said is like, for me, it's when I hear that, I'm like, oh, well, easier said than done, to just like have the confidence that yes, what I'm doing is going to work, but it's like something that we have to, or I have to like work on. That's like work that I have to like get there. It's not just like something, oh, I show up day one, I'm needling, and yet, yes, I know I'm gonna, do that, heal this person or facilitate the healing of this my, first patient.
This is something we have to work on.
And I also have heard of people doing something like what's described on this slide, where, if an herbalist is out of an herb, they'll write the name of the herb on a piece of paper and then put that in the bag of herbs to be cooked with everything else, and that will, serve the function of the herb that they were out of, like in present day.
I've wondered about how this applies to herbs, and I think for me that idea is like possible, but somehow I'm a little bit more skeptical. Like with the needle, somehow I understand between the heart and the hand something can flow, but I think you're probably right. If you have gathered yourself to that point where you can do that, I think maybe I couldn't do that, but I think maybe it could be done, and maybe I could eventually do that. Yeah, it does take, just like he's saying, you have to chant it 100,000 times. That may not be the specific work that you or I do in order to have this confidence while needling, but it does take some work. You can't just suddenly say, oh, here I am. You have to do some work to get to that point. So, if you chant something 10,000 times, 100,000 times with all your heart, that's a lot of work on yourself. So yeah, we can choose different ways of getting there, but it probably does take cultivation. Shall I go on, or anyone else? I have just a few more slides.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just going to say in that last, there's a lot of convincing going on here.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of what?
Convincing.
Oh.
Earnestly believing once he's out. He's sort of saying the same thing over and over again. And then this, once the T mechanism resonates, ghost and spirit situation pass into being. And it's almost like even the ghosts and spirits, even the things that aren't real pass into being, or things that are not of this world pass into being. So it's it's really kind of a hope that you can do this. It's not like a prescription or a think about it and it will happen. It's like a lot of work and a lot of like it's not. Right. I think what I'm trying to say.
Well, I've had treatments from Doug and they're amazing. His needle technique and his intention, whatever it is, I don't know. We've known each other for a long time. You can follow this guy in the clinic. I would recommend it. But I appreciate your contribution to the conversation, Doug, because you're always just a little dissonant about some stuff, which I adore, since 2003.
Dissonant?
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Well, thank you, Ingrid.
Yeah,
Okay, you owe her some money now for the advertising.
Oh, I hate her. I'm not there. No, thank
Oh, sorry, I was actually going to say something about Doug myself. Sorry, because when
got a
even
patient with me.
before I became a student at Emperor's, I had a treatment in the clinic, and I think he was just a substitute supervisor. But then I knew that at one point he helped out with the needling. And he was just like, it was so easy in its focus. It was just like here and very, both attentive and it felt very confident, and it was just, so, and besides that, he was just so very nice and remembered the next time he saw me, asked how I was and everything. He was very focused
You guys are too kind.
to that point.
You guys are
Doug.
too kind. I have got a patient, so I'm
Okay,
gonna go.
well,
I
they're
have
in
to
good
focus somewhere
hands.
else.
They're in good hands.
Lucky them.
Okay, I'm gonna move on and make sure we get the last slides done, and then if people need to go at 7:30, they can, or we can keep talking. So there's a phrase that, like, this phrase is used in more than one place, but it apparently is in a book from the Song Dynasty. It's a little hard to translate, so instead of translating it, I gave you some choices. Use intent, or whatever, however we want to translate this word. Use intent to guide chi, to lead chi, to guard chi, to stretch chi, to attract chi, to induce chi. This word has so many meanings also. But we can use intent to, at least to guide chi. Maybe that would be the easiest way to translate it, but I'm not sure it's the whole story. Yeah. And in Tai Chi Chuan, I'm not a Tai Chi practitioner, but this apparently is a pretty famous book that's been translated into English. And he has 10 essentials of Tai Chi Chuan. And the 6th one says, use intent, not force. That's pretty famous. I've heard that from martial arts people. Use intent, not force. So like when you're inserting the needle, you're not like, oh, if there's resistance, forcing it in. You use your intent, not force. So I think there's a difference, not strength, not power. These are just things I think we could think about. And actually, all 10 of those essentials looked pretty interesting to me. So I might buy this book. I don't have this book. I might buy this book, to just kind of think about how these things apply to acupuncture as well as to, the practice of Tai Chi. There's also another saying that wherever intent arrives, Qi also arrives. I think these are things that really apply to acupuncture, even if they came from martial arts, even if they came from, things like Tai Chi Chuan or Qigong or other stuff like that. So I just wanted to give you those phrases. There is this book, which I don't think a lot of people know about this book, but it's a book about developing internal energy for effective acupuncture practice. And it's like basically about developing intent and also, I don't know, it has to do with Qigong and meditation and so forth, but for the practice of acupuncture specifically. And it has in it translations of some, I think, Qing Dynasty texts about this. And the author is somebody who, I believe he got his, PhD in China in Chinese medicine. And he's, really quite literate and good translator. So you might want to check out this book if this kind of stuff interests you. My last little bit, though, is that medicine as intention came to mean something else, especially during the Qing dynasty. It doesn't only refer to acupuncture, although that's what we've been talking about up until now. But for example, there's a book, oh, this is a Ming Dynasty book, not Qing, but, you know, relatively late. There's a book that's called Gathering the Suitable in Medical Formulas by somebody named Ding Feng. And he said, medicine is intent, but actually here intent is not really a good translation. Remember in the beginning we saw it means so many different things and not only intent. And I had a long discussion with you know, a scholar and native Chinese speaker about this, and he assures me that, you know, in some of these kinds of sentences it means more like flexibility or adaptability, and it doesn't mean intent when it gets to this late time period of Chinese history. And so, you know, it's still Ija Iye, the same sentence, but medicine is adaptability. Adaptability is being suitable, being appropriate. And because of this, he says he named his book Gathering the Suitable. Okay, so that's just in his introduction to the book, but that's an example of him, you know, this has nothing to do with needling. This is about herbal formulas. And it's about adaptability and suitability. So here the meanings of E besides intent are a better translation, maybe intuit, attitude, thought. It means that you have to use your mind flexibly and ponder the best course to take in treating disease, and adapting to circumstances rather than sticking too hard to like a standard formula. This quote exactly says that. When diagnosing and treating disease, you need to have, you know, adaptable treatment. But actually, if we were using the word intent, we'd say intent treatment, but that doesn't make sense here. This is a different use of this same character. He says, adaptable treatment is valued. When applying herbs, you should find the methods, but don't stubbornly stick to a particular method. You should use formulas, but not so standardized that you don't even change them. You know, you need to be adaptable and flexible and change as the patient changes or change for the specifics of the case. And so you can see then that medicine is intent or intention changed more to medicine is flexibility or adaptability or suitability. And here's one more quote from early Qing dynasty. Medicine is adaptability. Again, that's that same medicine is intent, except that doesn't work here. It's like commanding troops against an enemy, or the skill of steering a boat. The important thing is adapting to circumstances. You know, steering a boat, you can't just steer straight for your goal. You have to go around the rocks and, you know, adapt to the circumstances. When you're commanding troops against an enemy, if, you know, there's an ambush over here, you have to respond to it. You can't predetermine. You have to be adaptable and flexible. So the important thing is adapting to circumstances. Troops don't keep a constant formation. Water doesn't have a constant force. And actually, this comes from a much earlier but longer and harder to translate statement by Zhu Danxi. So I just want to point out that this idea of medicine is intent works very well for acupuncture, but actually that same phrase still is used later on to mean more flexibility and adaptability. So here's that quote. Magic is just science that we don't yet understand. And I think intent is, you know, magic. Acupuncture is magic, but it's not that it's magic in the sense of, you know, something supernatural. It's just a science we don't yet understand, but we can still use it. We can still harness it, even if we don't have a scientific explanation for it. So we do have time for discussion, and we also need to hear from Ingrid about the learning garden, but I'm gonna, you know, let Eric take charge now.
Does anyone have any more questions or things they want to talk about?
I don't have a question, but I would like to add a couple slides ago, there was a book that Professor Wilcox had mentioned regarding Qigong. And in my experience, performing Qigong with an acupuncturist technique class in my previous college was very helpful in grounding yourself and also laying yourself into intention when we were practicing on each other in class. So I thought that was very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward to looking at that book.
This book that I'm showing now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth it if you are like a Qigong type practitioner or something like that. Yeah.
I thought I'd throw in 2 cents disclaimer. I'm not an acupuncturist. I'm a martial artist who is an open series student. But over the years of doing martial arts, I was a big, strong guy when I started in my 40s. And I found as I did more internal, when I would do blocks or techniques, I was drawn to what I assume now are acupuncture points. Because when you would do a block properly, where your partner didn't hurt, their arm would go numb, or it was having effects on their bodies in a different way. And as I've done more and become more involved with internal medicine, I've always felt that the more internal practice, whether it's through practice or just developing sensitivity to both your chi and another person's chi, would always be helpful for an acupuncturist. And it heard stories about the old masters, when they inserted a needle, it pulled itself in. And when the treatment was done, the needle pushed itself out because they were in the exact place. And today was kind of interesting to me because another class that I took used the story of the butcher and also had quotes from Ling Shu, and talked about when the cavity of the chi was hit, the needle engaged in a lane. But if you just hit the bone or flesh, there was pain. So from an outsider, I've always found it interesting that I think the internal feeds into the intent and makes a big difference. So just
Thank
2
you,
cents
Joel.
from an outsider.
Good to see you again.
Thank you for doing this.
By the way, if people have suggestions for topics, put them in chat, would you? For our next meeting. So anyway, Eric.
Yeah, so far, one possible option for the next meeting is just incantations in general that might be applicable to practice. But please put your ideas into the chat and then I'll compile them and we'll make a poll and figure out what to do next based on interest. I did have one other thought about adaptability. And I was just wondering, Dr. Wilcox, what you think like this means as far as like we adapt to the treatments as like, could you adapt new modalities into Chinese medicine, like adapt it in that way? Or should we be adapting our treatments in order to like work better with Western medical practitioners?
Well, I think what he means here is not always just using the standard formulas that comes out of the textbook, but being able to adjust it and modify it as the patient changes. That's what I think his meaning is. On the other hand, yeah, I think we should adapt to, new things. worry though that I have about that is like, if, oh, I want to learn this, and oh, I want to learn that, and oh, I want to learn the next thing, and then you become so scattered so you don't go deep into Chinese medicine, and now you're doing homeopathy, and now you're doing this, and now you're doing that. And it's not that homeopathy is bad, but it's just like, personally, my choice is to try and go deep in one thing rather than scatter myself shallow in 20 different things. So that's my worry about going into other stuff. If you can still keep your focus, other stuff is good to adapt and add in. But I wouldn't exchange breadth for depth personally.
But do you think it's possible to incorporate other modalities and use them within the framework of Chinese medicine?
Yes, but the problem is that often, people just go off into other way of thinking, and they're not taking this technique into Chinese medicine. They're just adding it on top of it, like a decoration on a cake or something, but it's not part of the cake itself. And so yes, you could use other types of things and use Chinese medicine theory, like the 5 flavors and heat and cold and so forth, and I think that would be fine. It's like Chinese medicine is inherently the thought, the theory, more than it is using a needle. If you're just going to use trigger points, acupuncture on trigger points or something like that, that's not Chinese medicine anymore, even though you're using a needle, because your thinking is not Chinese medicine thinking. This is my opinion. You don't have to agree.
All right, thank you. So if there are no other questions, we're going to move on. So this is a fundraiser. Dr. Wilcox is donating her time and energy, and in exchange, we're asking that people donate $5 to $10. For this session, we're raising money for the TCM Learning Garden at Venice High School. And so we have Ingrid Schneider here, who's going to speak about the garden for a few minutes. And I'm going to drop the link into the chat where you can make a donation. So now to Ingrid.
Hey, thanks, Eric and Dr. Wilcox. Thank you so much for putting on this class. I haven't been in a class for a long time that has sort of tickled my brain like this one has, even though I've been putting needles in people for a long time. So this is something that I would like to revisit forever. About the TCM Learning Garden, the predecessor to Dr. Fine, who is the clinical dean at Emperor's, was Robert Newman, and he collected or cultivated over 1,000 species of medicinal plants, a lot of which we still have. You're learning herbal medicine, you have to. And we have a really good collection of live plants. And I know you have your books and your flashcards and your notes and amazing teachers, but really the best way to learn about herbal medicine is to sit with a plant. And we have a lot of them. So I know that there are some posters around school about the Learning Garden. I'm there on Sundays. The garden currently is open Saturdays and Sundays from 12 to 3, and I'm there on Sundays from 12 to 4 or something like that. And there's a lot of stuff to do to maintain a garden. We got to weed, we have to water, we have to harvest seeds. It's autumn right now. I think a lot of our stuff has already been harvested. But pretty soon the Juhua and the Ye Juhua and the Futsa, which are the last sort of 3 plants to flower, are going to come up. And it's amazing. I mean, the stuff that you get in the clinic is you know, it's medicine. It's processed, it's dried, it's dry fried, it's vinegar fried or salt fried, but we have the live plants. And while sometimes we use the roots and you can't see the root medicine, you can see the flower or the aerial parts. And I think it's really important in the studying of herbal medicine to see the plants alive. I have known plenty of practitioners who create absolutely exquisite formulas without seeing the plants alive, but some people are beginners. And, you know, it's like a blind painter if you don't know what the plants look like, I think. And there's a lot to be done. It's kind of grunt work. There's weeding, there's watering, there's like really uncomfortable and hard tasks. But at the end of it all, you get to see the end. And if it's a perennial, there is no end. So we need some help. We need some energy in the garden. If you guys, the donations that we received today will go to, I think we want to get a shanja or maybe like a longyan roe or some sort of plant. I'll go on the latitude to see what plants in China might survive in this area, because I can grow anything, but to sort of yield medicinal properties, I'd like to sort of stick to the latitude in China, in America. And, you know, there's no West Coast in China. So we just try to do our best. But it's a really good resource for you if you're learning herbal medicine. Rachel is your TCM Learning Garden liaison. If you have questions, she's got an email. There's going to be a new student tea tomorrow on campus. I'm going to go there with a couple of plants or bits of plants or something like that. But come on down and meet your medicine. It's really important that you sort of get the round experience of what we have to offer. I'm a volunteer. I've been a chronic volunteer since 2005, which is a long time. But we're there. I'm there every Sunday. I hope to see you. And thanks again, Dr. Wilcox, for opening up this forum for me to speak particularly. And I'll let you know in the future with our donations what we purchase and how it's going. We'll make you a baby book. Thanks.
Ingrid is amazing. You will learn so much if you go spend some time with her at the Learning Garden.
Thank you, Ingrid. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add?
I just would say I'm starting my second year now, first part of second year, and I started going to the garden in January, and I can really, I've learned so much, just actually seeing the plants, working with them, and the way that it kind of stops time when you're like with your classmates in that space and you can like really look at something growing and then start to understand how you use it in clinic it's very, very special. So it'd be really fun, get to get dirty together. So that's always fun.
Thank you. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it up. And again, thank you, Dr. Wilcox. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Eric.
My pleasure and my honor. This is fun always. And thank you all so much for coming and for participating in the discussion. This one is a really, really good one. So I hope to see you all next time. All right.
Thank you.